Matt, thanks for joining me. I have a vested interest, and I know you do too, of talking about ways that parents can enhance the way that they, raise their children. I want to try and be the best father I could be. I know you feel the same way. And you guys have a variety of things going on. I think you have an interesting vantage point, which is why I wanted to talk to you today. I think it could provide a lot of insight for parents because you have Acton Academy, which is which I'll have you kind of share more about. But then you also have Apogee Strong, which is more of a virtual component. And you work with hundreds, if not thousands of kids on a regular basis. And I'd love to start here. Can you tell me a little bit more? And I know that we had you and Tim on the show before and we talked more about this, but can you tell me more about the Acton Academy way of thinking and how that differentiates from common education? And then I want to get into like lessons learned and things like that.
Yeah, totally, man. And I'm glad to go anywhere and everywhere with this. And you're right. Thousands upon thousands of young heroes that I've gotten to work with, which means thousands upon thousands of parents too. So those are, vastly intertwined, right? So, I always, when I lay this picture out for everybody, I always want to be super, super clear. So I came out of conventional education, right? So I was a public school teacher, public school administrator, private school teacher, private school administrator, worked at Stanford for a long time, still work with districts and universities all over the world. So I know schools better than anybody. So
How long were you in
a person? I'm talking systems.
How long were you in the public school system for?
About a decade.
About a decade.
Yeah.
And then what grades in particular did you have experience with?
So I worked all through K through 12.
Wow.
Yep. K through 12, both as a teacher and administrator. Right. So, and again, starting at the higher ed. So I know this game inside and out. So when I talk about the differences between conventional schooling and then what we do at Acton, people sometimes will hear that as, well, I'm anti-teacher, I'm anti-administrator. Dude, I'm so far the other way. I'm so, overly supportive of those good people. I'm very much against the system, right? And so the systems are where things are different. Whereas a conventional school, you've got, everybody stays with the people who are their exact same age, right? Their date of manufacture, I always say, right? You stay with them if there's somebody's
date of manufacture.
Date of manufacture.
I've never heard that before. All right.
And so if somebody's younger than me, I automatically get to kind of look down on them. If they're older than me, I automatically have to revere them. And then of course, there's always the ultimate authority figure, the teacher who gets to decide things, even like, do I get to go to the bathroom when I need to go to the bathroom, right? So you've got this weird false social structure that's set up in the first place that's not mimicked anywhere else in society. You go over to Acton Academy, you've got mixed age groups. You've got everybody having a voice. You've got the authority of the adult in the room. The hero has the same authority, right? So what differentiates us is we, first of all, have the belief that every young person is a genius. Bar none, across the board, you are a genius. Our job is to unlock, what does that look like? Jason Khalipa, there is nobody else that has the same set of experiences, knowledge base, passion. Like nobody else has that. So my job is to unlock that from you, right? And so our system is set up in a way where young heroes create contracts, character contracts with one another. They create goals for their own individual growth. They get to drive that. It's not predicated on a grade level. It's predicated upon who do I want to be and where do I want to go? And then they take on real world challenges that have real world applications versus attempting to do the same bit of academia that everybody else is. So they're going to start real businesses every single year. And they're going to take those businesses, into perpetuity, or they'll create new ones every year. They're going to take on projects like, maybe you've got to build a community. You've got to build a model city, and you've got to do part of it out of 3D printing, part of it out of cardboard, part of it out of Legos, and part of it out of clay. And then you got to run electricity to the whole thing. And we're going to bring it into an entire auditorium of people together, and you're going to flip that switch, and we got to see if it all works. Right? They're going to do real things. So we're changing the game to like, let's talk about experiences versus rote academia. It's so vastly different. It's not even close.
Now, you guys have been picking up some steam, if you ask me. how many locations? So it started off with obviously it started off with one, right? And now you actually own several here in California, but now you have licensed locations or partner or affiliate, whatever you want to call it, across the US. Is that what it looks like now?
We are all over the world. So we're actually in almost 30 countries at this point. We're in 40 states at this point. We've got close to coming up on 300 locations.
Wow. I'm just writing that down.
Yep.
And now when you think about the 300 locations and how you've grown, it's really interesting because ultimately it's an interesting dynamic here because it's a school, but it's a for-profit school, right? So how do those things work when you're growing for 300 locations? Is it a nonprofit or is it for-profit, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really different structure. And I love that you come out of CrossFit because there are some similarities there. Like we talk about that as a network. We talk about our similarity to CrossFit. So when you license the CrossFit name, you've got to get your L1 cert, right? And then you can go launch your CrossFit facility. You have sovereignty over that facility, but you also connect with all the other CrossFit owners all over the world. And then you collaborate and you come together on the games. We're doing the same kind of thing, right? So individual owners have sovereignty over their location. We license the name, we license the IP, we license the systems, all of the unique projects and things that we all put together as a network. We license those. And then as I create something new at my campus, I just share it with everybody else. And we come together as this global network of just, trying to get better and a little bit of competition, but a whole lot of like, let's get all of us to be better in that. So that's kind of how it comes together. We pay, so each location, some may be for profit, some may be nonprofit, depending on how they want to do it.
Right. And they license the Acton Academy brand and
all the IP. Yep.
And so when you think about an Acton Academy, what is like an ideal size for a school like that? I'm out of curiosity. I don't know much about schools and I'm fascinated.
Yeah. The ideal size is somewhere in the 150 to 200 range. And there's a very specific reason for that too. If you look socially at any kind of, there's a lot of social research around this where you can't really have super strong, tight-knit connections with any more than about 200 people. And so we want to keep our communities to that because we want all of our students to know one another. Again, ultimately, they're the ones that are running the program, right? I always tell people the ideal day, and this really freaks people out or they think it's cliche. I always say the ideal day is that the adults don't show up, the students don't notice, and nothing else changes. They still run it like a Fortune 500 company, right? And that's real. And in order for that to happen, though, the older students have to pour into the youngers, and they all have to know each other and have relationship. So we don't want to go over about that 200 mark. Otherwise, you start to miss that community aspect.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because you talk about the parallels with CrossFit. I think there are some parallels in regards to the license model. I've seen some pros and cons, the license model in particular. Pros are that, like us, we started off as a CrossFit affiliate. We started in the trenches, we tested, we developed, and then we kind of found what worked for us and we kind of evolved and grew. So it brings new things to the table because you're not saying, hey, you have to be cookie cutter, right? And so now new ideas and concepts can come up. At the same time, though, keeping quality and consistency is key. And that's been some like kind of the give and the take of that, right? Is you're not telling people exactly what to do, which leads to more creative thought, but could also lead to more, what I mean, not as good a product either, right?
It can. And that's the tough balance, man. And that's as a network, that's what we're looking at is like, okay, how do we, because we named it Acton Academy because Lord Acton is famous for saying, power corrupts, absolute power tends to corrupt. Absolutely. Right. If you've ever heard that quote. So power corrupts, absolute power tends to corrupt. Absolutely is what he's famous for saying. And the reason we took that is because we believe in that decentralization of power. So there is no Acton HQ, so to speak, to say, hey, follow this, follow that, follow this, follow that, because a community in Shanghai, China is different than Santa Clara, California, which is different than Durham, North Carolina, which is different than Guatemala. So we want that sovereignty. We want that ability to adapt to what the community is. But you're right, quality control. So how do we manage that? And so that's where we've got kind of for lack of a better term, it's kind of a governance council. We don't get paid for it. We don't get, there's no benefits for it other than we work more, right? And that governance council gets to kind of travel around though, and just kind of drop in and see like, how can I help? And I really want to make sure we are a learner-led environment. If we're really adhering to those principles of a learner-led environment, character-driven, unleashing these heroes on the world, it's not this top-down, adult-driven organization, then cool. We're gonna be okay, and we're gonna kind of go with it. If we see somebody is starting to gear more towards like looking like a conventional school, we'll pull the affiliation.
And so when you talk about the conventional school, and this is where I really wanted to talk to you about. So I think the business model of Acton, I could talk about the business side of that for hours, right? I love the business side. But I'm really curious as a parent myself. I'm always trying to think of ways, how do I lead? How do I become a better father, right? Like, for example, tomorrow I leave actually, I'm going out to Austin, Texas, and I'm taking the kids on a trip just by myself. And I've never done this before. So I'm going to be going away for 4 days, just me and the kids. And that's a cool opportunity, but I'm always trying to find ways, whether it's working out with my kids in the garage, whether it's doing different things. But I'm wondering, from all your experience, and I think that, I see on your social media different insightful things and kind of eye-opening for parents. What are you seeing as a whole, as a society, parents kind of gaps in areas where maybe we can improve, and maybe small steps we could take to enhance our children's life? And I know that's like a super big conversation, but I just want to start the conversation. That's it.
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. And again, I'm so pro teacher. I'm so pro administrator. The conventional school system by design is not meant for human development. So what I always caution parents to realize are, and I try to do it in these little sound bites, right? And these little nuggets that I try to make it as logical a leap for people, because we've been so ingrained that school, as it looks in a conventional sense, is what is needed in order to have some modicum of success, however you define that, whether it's happiness, whether it's, opportunity, whether it's ability. But what I'm trying to get people to realize is that specific design of conventional school was brought over. It was this Prussian model to, in the industrial era, to essentially get people who were smart enough to follow directions, who were definitely obedient enough to follow directions, but not someone who would, you want to develop too many people that would think outside the status quo and start to see the world for the opportunities that it really has. It's really not designed for human development. It is designed to crush your spirit and to make you obedient, period. And that's why the Rockefeller model has continued to this day. That's why teachers' unions, politicians, all have a vested interest in keeping it the exact same way. So what I tell parents is, I get it. If you've got your kids in conventional school and that's the way, I fully understand. Look at the model of stay with my own age. I've got to bend to authority, a focus on a very narrow definition of what smart is, right? On this academia, life works in subjects, all these things that don't transfer over. And the model of that most closely resembles prison more than anything else, more than any other system in our society. School resembles prison more than absolutely anything else that we have going on. So understanding that you as a parent need to think outside of that. So if they're doing that during the day, you've got to switch that mindset when they get home. You've got to lead by example. We can't tell kids, follow your dreams, focus. You can be anything you want to. You can be anything you want to, Jason, but all day, every day, I want you to do the exact same thing as every other kid at the exact same time. And there's a very specific timeline for you to do that. Otherwise, you're failing.
So I'll pause you just for a second. So, I mean, you said some pretty, Like it's most similar to jail. Okay. So I
100%.
see where you're going with this. Like school's been, I mean, dates back, years and years and years and years and years. And when you talk about like bowing to authority, that was something that just stuck out in my head. Where do you draw the line between bowing to authority? And I know COVID, obviously, that's a whole different
Of course. Yep.
But bowing to authority in the sense of like a student accepting that their teacher is the authority and recognizing that there's an importance in that, where at the same time not bowing. So where is that balance? Because what I'm curious about is I want my kids to understand that they need to respect their elders. They need to, like, there's certain like authority figures. Like, for example, this idea of police officers, for example.
Of course.
Right? Very simple. Hey, respect what they say. If what's going on isn't right, let's settle it up later. But at that moment, just listen to what they have to say, because it's going to be better off for everybody, right? It's kind of like this theory, right? Where do you bridge the gap between not like, this authority? It's a weird dynamic. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic until you get into the right. And, I try to simplify it as just what's right and wrong. Right. That's ultimately what we're talking about is what is the difference between doing what somebody says because they're in a position of authority. And this is, even like you said, your example of legality versus morality, right and wrong. Do you respect the authorities? Do you respect police officers when they are telling you to do something that is immoral, right? The Nazis followed directions. They were just doing what they were told. So it's a right and wrong thing that has to come from home. And I'm not saying you shouldn't respect your teachers and obey them. I think that's absolutely it. But what we have to realize is you've got 12 years of consistently, automatically having to obey this authority who, again, you might be 17 years old and having to ask permission whether or not you can go to the bathroom. They may say yes or no, and there's an inherent distrust that's built there. And then the next day you graduate high school, you're 18 and you're supposed to go make a bunch of decisions for yourself. What's happening is kids are going into the workforce and they're still playing that game. They're still asking permission, right? They still got a permission-based mindset. Now you start sneaking in agendas into the system, right? So now I'm going to tell you, here's what your political leaning needs to be. Here's what your sexual leaning needs to be. Here's what your religious leaning needs to be. We can start inserting those in there, and the kids are not allowed to question that because, again, you can't question authority. So it comes down to the right or wrong. I never want anybody to be disrespectful, but we've got to be careful on setting our kids up foundationally to go against what a lot of parents consider the moral fabric of that family. And then it gets exacerbated into, the university level as well. And so that's where it's the right or wrong kind of thing that is the tougher balance to chat about.
So, my children are in 5th and 2nd grade. And I feel like at this point, you're right. I mean, look, they're in school for, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pretty much daily, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of there's a lot of influence, especially for children then go to daycare and that kind of stuff, which ours don't. But we have tried to incorporate influences from a variety of family members as well, right? So we're very fortunate that we have a lot of family around. So my dad, my mom, my in-laws, my this. So there's a lot of different influences that could support that there's which I think is important because a child is just developing. If they only listen to me, well, they might not understand a different perspective on things. And so I'm curious for you, when you think about the current school system, if a parent is saying, okay, my kids go to a traditional school, I'm not prepared to go to an Acton Academy, I don't have one near me. You say that, it's all about them leading from the front, right? Which is, I think, important, right? Saying to yourself, I think that was a really interesting thing you're saying. Hey, if you're saying you could be anything you want to be, right? But then you're stuck in the same system. So what is our next step? Where do we evolve? How do we do this as parents when our kids get home from school?
It's a great question, man. So the the parental support, especially if you're in conventional school, the parental support is so crazy. Because again, remember, as they go up in this system, they're being told to do the same thing, same time as everybody else, disconnected from the world. And then those agendas can come in. Jason, your kids might be racist because they're white, and that's just something we've got to teach them as far as the agenda goes. Now, all of a sudden, you've got to battle that, right? That's part of the curriculum. You're going to have to battle this at home. So parents leading is a big deal. So I always talk to parents about a few things. One, lead by example. Again, you're not saying you can go be everything you want to be, but if I'm at home complaining about my job, complaining about my lot in life, complaining about my situation, I'm playing the victim. My kids are seeing that too. My kids are listening to me have those conversations. If I'm saying, I wish I had, I wish I could have, I wish I had started this business, I wish I had taken this chance, but I'm telling them, go be all you can be, they understand that there's hypocrisy there. So leading by example with going after your best life, you continuing to grow, having that growth mindset is paramount. That's first and foremost, right? Because they're going to know if you're not leading that life. The respect and the manners. Again, automatic obedience and respect are not the same things. Understanding respect towards your fellow humans, having those good manners. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. No, ma'am. Again, you leading by example in that, but you expecting that from them too, is a big deal. Cheering on their efforts and cheering on their failures. This is another thing that I get, that I have a beef with school. You know, I talk about this. I actually posted something on this the other day. Your kids were learning to walk, and as they started taking their first steps, right? What happened? They fell down. You as a parent, what did you do? You went, yay, yes. You cheered them on, and they went, oh, okay. And then they got up and they took a couple steps and they wobbled and they fell again. And you went, yes. You cheered on these failures because you understood if they kept getting that support, well, eventually they're going to learn to walk, right? And so they have that mindset of like, okay, I keep falling down, but I'll keep getting back up because something good's coming on the other side. Well, then they go to school at 5 and they're told, if you get the wrong answer, well, something's wrong. Don't get the wrong answer. Don't fail. If you get the wrong answer all the time, then something's wrong, and you've got to do it at this specific time. Otherwise, you're quote unquote behind. And it starts to mess. You have a lot of these kids who start thinking they're not smart, they're not intelligent, just because some things aren't clicking at a given time. And some of these things are completely arbitrary and not even necessarily developmentally correct at that time. So parents cheering on their effort is a huge part of that, and saying, hey man, that's okay. If you didn't get this part right, you quote unquote failed at this, that's all right. Get back on the horse. Let's roll. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with, grades mean very, very little. Your effort means everything. So parents leading from that point of view is a big deal.
Right. So just to kind of clarify that one, you're not opposed to, you're not opposed to tests and right and wrong answers, A's, B. What you're opposed to kids having a fear of failure, and you want to cheer on the effort to try and get the right answer more so than the right answer itself. But you want the answer to be either right or wrong, though.
Of course, I want the answer to be, of course, have the answer. Like there's a right and there's a wrong.
Right.
To say that there's a time frame of when you've got to understand that right and wrong starts to get into muddy waters, right? Mm-hmm. So I always say when I walk into a room, and if I end up talking to college professors or school districts around this stuff, when I walk into a room, I'll ask them if anybody looked at me and went, dude, I bet that guy didn't walk until he was like 18 months old. Because I didn't walk until I was like 18 months old. That seems late, right? A lot of kids are walking at a year old or whatever. I ended up being a relatively decent athlete. I was a 5'9" white guy that could dunk a basketball, right? I was relatively fast, relatively strong, was a mixed martial artist, I had a good athletic career, but I didn't walk until I was late. But we do that with kids in school where they go, okay, well, if you're not reading these specific words right now, or you can't do this specific, type math right now, well, you're behind, you're remedial. We're going to have to pull you out. And we start destroying their mindset early because they're not at this arbitrary academic standard. That's where that's part of the place that it gets super, super dangerous too, because we start destroying their mindset, which destroys their love of learning. And we do it really, really early on. We start to hammer academia super, super early. So I'm not opposed to right and wrong, but let's do it at a developmentally appropriate time. And let's give a little bit of leeway for these young heroes, because they might not really hit some of these certain academic metrics until they're 9 or 10, but then they cruise through everything else that you would normally do in an entire K through 12 career. And we've seen it. I've seen kids go through the entire K through 12 curriculum in 3 years.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, because you're right. Like, there could come to a point where the teacher might say, hey, you're not ready for the 3rd grade because you're not hitting these milestones. But then developmentally, when they're working with other students in the class, I mean, I guess that's partly one of the reasons why you guys don't really have grade levels, right? You guys kind of, so if you're a parent and, some things I'm, leading by example, right? Obviously, treating people with respect, cheering on effort. Like, I mean, these are things that are universally accepted. Like, it's hard to argue, like, leading by example, but it's easier said than done in the particular example that you said, right? Where you're saying, like, I tell our kids all the time, like, Ava, if you want to be a doctor, you can be anything you want to be, because I actually believe that, like, in my soul, right? Yep. But now, I think she sees that we're trying to do our best to, do sure. But as a parent, if you've been in a 9-to-5 job, working, traditional job, maybe you came out of college, right? You followed the typical structure. Let's just say you went to college, you went into debt, you then came out of college, you found a job for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. You then worked your way up in a corporate environment, but you've had your eyes open. You want to think a little bit differently for your children. Maybe you're not in a position where you can go, follow your pursuits of opening up a jiu-jitsu gym, because it's just not the responsible thing to do as a parent. How do you find that balance, I guess? And what would be next steps, for example?
Yeah, I don't look at that I get what you're saying, because you have the priorities, right? I don't look at that as the responsible thing to do is continuing to acquiesce, because then you're living in hypocrisy. So, in my mind, the responsible thing to do in that scenario would be to go, okay, so I fell into this trap. I was told, do all this, go to college, go into debt, come out, continue to pay this debt for the rest of your life. And I'm in a job that, is this 9-to-5 that I don't love, to take care of the debts that I got tricked into. Well, the first thing, the most responsible thing to do is not to then recreate that scenario for your young child, right? And that's where the grip of school has so many people entangled, right? I come out and I'm doing a job that has nothing to do with this major that I took in college that I'm still paying for in my 40s. And I'm not super, super happy about that whole thing. This entire thing was pre-planned for me and it did not work out. But gosh, and I don't necessarily feel equipped to educate my own child. But gosh, I'm going to put them right back through that same system. To me, that's irresponsible. To me, that's horrifying. And I was kind of on that same path, right? Because I did all that, because I went to college, because I took out the loans, and I started, and I had those, 9-to-5 jobs in schools. But once I made that connection, okay, well, what I'm doing here in school, this is something I can't do this. Integrity wise, I can't do this. And by the way, my kids will never do this. I left there to start the schools that I start. And I was also working another full-time job, doing both at the same time, right? And so I had the 16, 17, 18, 19-hour days for a couple of years to make sure I could make that transition. To me, there was no alternative.
That's a really interesting perspective that you just shared. So you're saying, if you're a, adult, and you fought for years to get out of debt from school for whatever, degree you got, right? And that was a struggle for you as an adult. but yet your children, are we setting them up to go through that exact same system?
Right.
I had never thought about that. I
Yeah.
mean, my background was a little bit different. I was very fortunate. I went to a junior college for 2 years, went to a 4-year university for 2, but I
Yep.
was able to do it, fortunately, without any debt. And
Good.
so when I came out and opened up our business, I didn't have that loan from school to
Yep.
have to worry about. And I went the non-conventional route where I opened a company. But so if a parent is listening to this and they're saying to themselves, okay, I could dig what Matt's saying right now. I could actually I could understand that. What are their steps then as a parent? Because is college not the future, you think, of the future? What do you think?
I think college is dead now.
You think college is dead now? Okay.
College is dead now. The degree is dead now, and never mind 10 years into the future. So I was speaking to a group of Ivy League professors a couple months ago. Brought me out to speak to them. They're from all the East Coast Ivy League schools, and I said, "What do students get from being in your classes that they could not possibly get anywhere else and likely for free? What do they get? Like, why do I have to take Professor Khalipa's class? Because if I don't take his class, I'm not going to get that educational experience anywhere else." Their collective answer, and they were adamant about it, was, well, you could probably learn all of this somewhere else and for free, but you wouldn't get the degree. Okay. Are we after the illusion of learning something, or are we after actually learning something? Because what most people are after is that illusion. It's that bumper sticker for the parent saying, I'm a Harvard mom, to show other people that I'm a good parent. It's that piece of paper to theoretically say I did some stuff, when most people that went through college know they didn't actually learn a whole lot. So yeah, the application of education is already dead. Companies are already saying, I don't really care if you have the degree. I want to see that you have the skill set, right? And I might still put degree required, but it's normally a filtering system. And oh, by the way, my job, not just opening these schools, my job for the last 7 years has been working with all the top Fortune 500 companies in the world around how to hire and retain good young talent. And they don't care if the degree is there. Yes, there's your medical fields that need those. Yes, that's, everybody always says, well, what if you want to be a doctor? Cool. What if you want to be the 99.9% of other jobs, right?
Yeah, I think we could all agree that the medical field, I think, is probably an exception. And I'd say probably legal field. There's definitely some exceptions to the rule.
There's some exceptions to the rule. Most people don't know you can become a lawyer without a law degree too. There's different ways to play the game, but you're right. There are some exceptions to the rule. So you have all of that right now. Never mind 10 years into the future. We have no idea what the world looks like 10 years into the future. We have no idea what kind of jobs are there. We have no idea what kind of needs are there. We have no clue. So the thought that, well, I guess we'll just make sure every kid knows algebra by the time they're 13 so that they're going to be prepared for this uncertain future is asinine. The thought that, well, you're going to have to go and pay $100,000 for this illusion of an education to be ready for the future, when you and I are talking right now, what is this, March 15th, 2022. And I think you have about 40% of 2020 college grads in our country right now are still unemployed.
So let's break this down for a quick second, because I think it's a really interesting topic that we're discussing in the future of college. One thing that's undeniable is that college is getting more expensive,
Yep.
and it's taking longer to pay that back down.
Yep.
That's pretty cut and dry.
Totally.
I also think that companies are actually becoming more aware that the degree might not be as relevant as previously stated back in the day.
Correct.
Now, but let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Yep.
Going to college, for me, I learned most of what I use in our business from a gentleman that took me underneath his wing when I was like 16 years old in the traditional health club. And what school taught me is how to make a commitment, fulfill that commitment, and work in a professional atmosphere with other people, like capstone courses, things of that nature. So how do you use the term filtering system? I look at it as a filtering system to show commitment, that you were able to say, hey, I'm going to commit to this college degree and I'm going to finish what I started. How do you replace that?
Can you not show commitment any other way? Real question.
I mean, of course. I mean, guess,
right? I mean, can you not start a sport? Can you not start jiu-jitsu and go, hey, I'm going to stay in this until I earn my black belt? Does that not show commitment? Can I not go, I am going to, start this business as a young person, and I'm going to stick with this business for 4 years and track my progress and get to profitability to where I'm making some money. And now all of a sudden I'm a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old that's owned a business for 5 years, and maybe I'm doing 5 figures every single year. Does that not show commitment? There's almost anything that you can say you got during the time of college, it's possible to show and develop the other way. You talked about, working collaboratively. Once again, going back, and not that Acton Academy is the only place to get this, but the projects these young heroes are working on. When I go, okay, you guys have 6 weeks to build this mock city. When you guys have 6 weeks to put on a play, right? And 18-year-olds down to the 5-year-olds, you're all going to work together. Some of you are going to write the script. Some of you are going to act. Some of you are going to direct. Some of you are going to build the set, build the props, costumes, sell tickets. You're collaborating, right? Every experience that we culturally say, well, college is good for, it can be easily duplicated, a lot of times much more efficiently and almost always less expensively in another fashion.
So let's tackle 2 more questions.
Please.
Then. How about the social side of going to college? So, the last couple of years, people have been online. I've seen it firsthand. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law, my sister-in-law she's at USC Film School, and it's awesome, right? And one of the benefits I'm just going to use this as an example. USC Film School provides 2 really important things, I think, for her. Well, obviously the education on how to, create movies and whatnot, which I think you could probably get that elsewhere. But it's the network coming out of the college to then support for a job, right? So how do you replicate the network that you're accomplishing out of college? And then how do you replicate the social experiment of living in dorms, being on your own? How do you replicate those things before you go out in the real world? And or they're not even that important. The network and the connection to other people.
Yeah, those things are, your network and your connection to other people are wildly important. Far more important than most people will give credence to, right? Like, they're wildly important. I look at my social. So I graduated high school at 17, and moved out of the house and was in the dorm still at 17, right? And started college. Before that, I was paying for the entire thing. I never moved back home, never took a dime from my parents, and had to work, multiple jobs usually throughout college in order to make it work, right? Even with that, my social experience, and I dare say I'm not the only one. Granted, this is not everybody's experience, but my social experience was a whole lot of parties, a whole lot of girls. I've never been I've never had a drink of alcohol in my life. I've never done drugs in my life, but I was definitely around a whole lot. I went to Chico State, right? So I was around a whole lot of that. Is it a fun experience? Absolutely. Does that mimic your life experience? I would argue that it doesn't. It's the quote unquote college experience and cool. But could I have not gone to a bunch of parties and slept with a bunch of girls without paying college tuition? I probably could have. Could I have not gotten an apartment on my own and lived on my own at 17, 18 and paid for that without the college experience? Well, of course I could, right? So the social development part, And again, like to really prove this theory out, we'd have to take all of the people who didn't go to college and go, well, gosh, look, you can clearly see they're all socially defunct. They're all socially, not, and that's clearly not the case, right? So, your social development, I would argue, you shooting for tons of parties, drugs, and STDs isn't necessarily like setting you up for success. So, and again, that's not everybody's experience, but what I'm saying is the social aspect of living on your own and taking that responsibility. Well, you don't need college to do that part. The network part is another piece of that. If my kids could go to college, debt free, maybe they got a scholarship or whatever, and they could go get that experience and take 4 years off in their life, and they wanted to do that. Cool, man. I'm all for it. Like, go get it. Cause you don't have any debt. You've got 4 years off. I mean, essentially from responsibility. Let's not pretend we have to take a ton of responsibility in college. There's some, but there's not as much as if you just lived on your own and had to work and just kind of make things happen and maybe start a business. Your network would be, that's the only thing I would tell them to really focus on. Get your grades good enough to, get a degree. Nobody cares if you got a degree. Most people don't even check. Most companies don't even check to see if you actually have the degree you say you have. I mean, if we're honest about it, be very, very specific about that network. Pay attention to the people who are all, what families are well connected, what families are good, hardworking, responsible, driven, character-driven people. Like, cool, make friends with them. Hey, also, you could do that without going to college. Like, that's great that you get exposed to that. Look at the young men of Apogee Strong that you got to chat with. How cool is it that all those 14, 15, and 16-year-old young men got to reach out and have a conversation with Jason Khalipa? And then how cool is it that, the next week they had Tim Kennedy, and the next week they had Andy Frizella, and the next week they had Beaudreau, and the next week, they had Leif Babin, and the next week, like, talk about developing a network. And none of that has anything to do with college. So again, can there be a network thing for college? Of course. Can you develop that other ways, sometimes more efficiently and less expensively? Absolutely, provably so.
So if you're a parent out there and you're saving in a 529 plan, right? So, so
ditch it.
So, as a parent, right, you could put money into a 529, which is essentially it's a vehicle that a parent can use to create. They can put money in, and basically a child can take it out for it to be used in some form of school, right? Traditionally, it's used for college, and they can take it out tax-free. And so if you're a parent out there and you're putting a couple $1,000 a year from when the kid was, born, and now you have, let's just say, I don't know, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is.
Awesome.
What would you say for those parents out there who are kind of like, they're kind of seeing what you're seeing, that, hey, there might be a different way. What would you recommend with that $100,000 they have in the 529 program?
That's awesome, man. If you got 100 grand for your kiddo, and that's great, man. Why would you not take that money and then teach that young person to invest in real estate with that and get cash flow right away? Why would we not take that 100 grand and maybe purchase a small business and have that young person who's super excited about whatever it is, baking and cooking, and there's a small bakery that comes up for sale? Why would you not buy that and give them the experience of running that business? Are we looking for a real education and real opportunity, or are we looking for the illusion of education by sending them to college with that 100 grand? Why not take that 100 grand, audit your kid versus audit what society says, right? Society says everybody's got to go to college. Society says everybody's got to X, Y, and Z. As a parent, I look at my kids. You have 2 kids, Jason, so they're wildly different. There's a lot of similarities, but they're wildly different too. They've got different loves, passions, desires, abilities, strengths, weaknesses. And if you're really paying attention, you'll have to parent them slightly differently too. Yes, there's a universal respect, character, responsibility, manners, all those things, effort, universal. but there's specific ways that I parent each one of my 3 kids based on who they are. I'm taking that 100 grand and going, okay, Morgan has a love of horses, man. And so she really wants to go into that field. So as she's growing up, I'm getting her exposed to as many things as possible. And then when we've got that 100 grand sitting there, I'm going to go, okay, do we have any way to invest that into your future in working with horses? If not, do we just have any way to invest that in something else? It's a real learning experience, into a business, into investment. And that's great. We can get things tax-free. Why don't we teach our kids how to not pay tax? I don't pay taxes, period. Why aren't we teaching that? And I do it all legally. I'm not even in the 1040 system, right? So why don't we start working with our kids around those kind of things rather than arbitrarily throwing it in a university that's already got $1 billion endowment?
And so what if you're a parent and, you know, you talk about businesses, and obviously I'm pretty entrepreneurial minded.
Sure.
I think a lot of people that you network with are also entrepreneurial minded.
Sure.
I would say that the bias towards your schools, this is just my perspective.
Yeah.
Would be towards parents and families who are a little bit more, I don't want to use the word progressive, because I think that comes with a lot of, but probably entrepreneurial minded. I would imagine more parents than not that go to your school have experience in business or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to articulate, or am I totally
stereotyping? Oh no, you're right. You're absolutely right. The majority of them are there's a proclivity towards entrepreneurship. What I always tell, and we get this a lot, right? And people will say, well, you want everybody to be entrepreneurs. And I actually think, gosh, it's probably 1 to 2% of the population that should be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right. Honestly, but I think the entrepreneurial mindset benefits everyone, including anybody that wants to work for a specific organization. My employees all have a very entrepreneurial mindset. They're very resilient. They're very self-aware. They're very self-confident. They're very much looking for places to contribute and have a growth mindset of how do we get better and what is the competition doing? And that entrepreneurial mindset is there. Right. And so that's what we're looking to develop. So, you know, coming out with that 100 grand, maybe you don't have maybe you don't use it to buy a business, and that's fine. Maybe you pay for a college alternative like Praxis, or what we're going to do with Apogee U, where you come out, it's ultimately a debt-free opportunity, and you take 6 months to do these boot camps of all these transferable skills. And then you go do an apprenticeship at a company that you're really, really excited to work for, in a field that you're really, really excited about learning, more about. Go do that. You come out debt free. You still got that 100 grand to invest in other places, invest into your first house, invest into real estate, invest into other, into other avenues that you want to invest. That's a far better kickstart to a career than throwing that at a university.
And so I'm curious, you've seen children from kindergarten through 12th grade. How long is Acton? How long have you had Acton?
I've had my oldest campus I've had my 5 years. Acton as a network, we actually had our MBA program started about 15, 16 years ago. And then the first K through 12 about 13 or 14 years ago.
So as a network, it's been around for a while. You've personally had it for 5 years. So I love going off personal, so the last 5 years that you've had your school, how many students have you seen come in and maybe they're in first, second, third, fourth grade? And then over the next 5 years, how many of them have you seen who had a similar interest in something and that interest stayed the same versus, because one of the things I'm curious about is when you go to college, I was talking to my brother-in-law about this, is that they want to bucket you. Okay. So I come out of high school and they say, hey, what do you, I went to a school called Santa Clara University. And they say, what do you want to do? Well, I'm like, well, I kind of like business. Oh, well, what emphasis do you want to do? Well, I don't know, management. But at the time, you're 16, 17 years old. You don't have much experience through high school. Again, you're kind of going through the plan. I guess my question is twofold. I think I know the answer for you. You don't like the fact that coming out of high school, you have to kind of pick a mold, I imagine, right?
Well,
but how many times have you seen these students really find something they care about deeply at a younger age and actually sustain it versus shifting around?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. And I don't know that I necessarily have a percentage of how many times you see it. The majority of them do shift. But Acton is built to allow for that shift. So let me explain what I'm talking about there. So you're talking about coming out, going into college, and then you're right. You've got to have, what do you want to be? And we're going to put you in this bucket here, and then this is going to be your major, right? And so I talk to young people all the time where it's, hey, what do the people ask them I hate that question of what do you want to be when you grow up? I hate it because it forces you to pigeonhole yourself into one thing. And so like there's common answers right now. You ask most teenage girls right now, you ask a lot of them nursing. Why? Because it's always in high demand and it pays really well. They don't know a damn thing about it. The majority of them have no clue. They don't necessarily have any desire. They're not looking at it, studying it right now. They have no idea what that actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. They're just parroting what they think is a good answer to that, right? They don't have any experience in that. The reason something like Acton or an alternative sort of deal, homeschool, whatever that looks like, we want them to collect experiences over academia is so that in those experiences, well, maybe they go do a job shadow. Maybe they go do apprenticeships. Maybe they go do internships. They get real world, upfront, close and personal application of what does this actually look like? And you can actually make a more informed decision. Then you can shift the conversation from what do you want to be to what problems do you see in the world? What do you want to solve? What do you want to solve now? What kind of things do you want to change? Like you start shifting the mindset a little bit, but you give them experiences to draw from. You don't have a lick of wisdom until you've done some things. And you need those experiences as early as possible. And most of the time, you're not even getting those through college. Again, you're doing academia.
And I'm, as you can tell, I'm very intrigued on this conversation.
Yeah, I love it.
If you have a child who seems to excel at athletics, and athletics primarily, I've been trying to think about this, like, unless you're turning pro at 15, which it's pretty rare in most sports. I don't know what sports you could.
Yeah.
You're probably going to end up being in the system for school through. And I think for you, do you kind of like see that as a path, right? Like you were saying earlier, you said, hey, if you get a scholarship, dude, and you can go play football somewhere, go do it. Awesome. But what else should kids be doing or parents be thinking if their children are pursuing athletics, they're in the traditional system, and they are going to go through college? What outliers do you see available to kids or for parents to provide their kids so that they can get that school and the football, whatever they're doing, all good? But in addition, what else should they be looking at?
Yeah, it's all experiences, right? So what people ask me, what is the curriculum that somebody should take a look at? What is the curriculum that we should make sure we have, whether it's through an Acton, whether we're supplementing to traditional schools, whether we're homeschooling, whatever. What is the curriculum? What do kids need, right? And what I tell them, for an uncertain future, meaning uncertain, like we don't know where things are going business-wise, what jobs are available, what the culture looks like. We have no idea. The kids need a few abilities. One, they need the ability to learn whatever they want to learn when they want to learn it. So they've got to understand what learning looks like, not what listening to somebody tell, like what does learning look like? If I want to find out about X, Y, and Z, how do I find out about it? How do I supercharge that learning so I can go figure it out? Just as importantly, they need to understand how to unlearn something that is no longer relevant, because that's more and more going to be something that we've all got to figure out, right? Because right now, you and I are speaking on a piece of equipment that 10 years ago, I mean, was pretty much like it didn't even really exist. I've got this iPhone right here that I do a ton of business on. 12 years ago, that wasn't even a thing, right? So 10 years from now, what are we going to be using? You got to be able to unlearn things that are no longer relevant. Then they need self-awareness and they need self-confidence. Self-confidence comes from doing hard things. That's one of the reasons I love sports so much, is because you actually have to get an outcome. You actually have to perform in order to win, right? So you've got to actually do hard things. You can't build real confidence without actually having done something. And self-awareness comes from experiences. So that's great. They've got the sports and they're doing all that and they're going awesome. Can they still do an internship? Can they still go volunteer somewhere? Can they still go do a job shadow? Can they still take on a mentoring project of their own where they're helping somebody else in their community that's younger than them? Can they still work on developing their network by reaching out, taking advantage of the fact that they're a young person and reaching out to 20 CEOs that they would love to chat with and seeing if they can land an interview, with somebody? Can they still work on their sales skills? Can they work on, can they go read books around mindset and growth mindset? Like supplement with those kind of things. It's about the self-awareness and the self-confidence. That's what's going to set them up for success. Hopefully those opportunities pan out with all the sports, and that's phenomenal. But it's the mindset that you're building over everything else.
So one thing I want to talk about just briefly before we close out is you said that you have not experienced drugs and alcohol. And I just wanted to kind of touch base on that. This is I am curious.
Yeah.
What drew you to avoiding drugs and alcohol your entire life? What was that?
Yeah. So my father actually had never was in the same boat. And what was interesting is I remember him telling me as a young man, he was telling me stories about my grandfather, my uncles, and all these guys who were really not super good guys. They were they were pretty aggressive. They were pretty they were kind of on the wrong side of the law for the most part, and how a lot of times the drinking was, kind of this catalyst, right? And it kind of exacerbated it. And then I remember looking at my dad, who was a pretty freaking hard dude as it was, who was also kind of, he worked in law enforcement, but really always say, he worked at the prisons, but he probably should have lived there. He was kind of one of those guys, and he and his buddies at the prisons were kind of running the law enforcement gang inside, and so they were some rough dudes. And I saw him get in a lot of fights in the streets and do some very shady things. So we kind of had this whole, and I was a pretty aggressive, I had that aggression. I like to fight, which is why I got into mixed. Like I liked it. So I didn't want to, it was the integrity thing. For as much as I had that aggressiveness in me, I've always, I feel like been a good person. I value other human beings. I truly like other human beings. And so I just didn't want to put myself in a situation where I wasn't in control of, making those decisions. So I just never touched it. I got in enough trouble with, fights and girls without it. And I just never wanted to test it. I don't have anything against it. And if people, I literally have, free will, man, do what you're going to do. I hope you make good decisions on it. It just wasn't for me.
Hey, fair enough, man. I appreciate that. Dude, I think, look, every time I talk to you, I just feel like it kind of opens up. I like these conversations because I think that more and more of these have to happen across the kitchen table, not necessarily with their children in there, but with parents. I think parents, single parent, any parent, whoever, should be having these conversations, and they don't need to be like super on one side or super on the other side, but at least being open-minded enough to understand that maybe the current system isn't optimized.
Sure.
And maybe there's a way that we could help optimize our children's experience, or maybe they start pursuing things that you're doing, right? With Acton Academy and Apogee Strong online. But I just think that if we don't even have the conversation, you don't know what's possible. You know what I mean?
That's it, man. And it's, I don't fault anybody for, making decisions. I surely don't think everybody should think like me. But I do have a hard time with the thousands of parents I've gotten to work with. What I've found is most people don't necessarily give it thought. Again, you don't have to think like me, but give it a little bit of a thought, because most people just fall in line with what the culture says and then wonder why they're living in and parenting from a place of fear and a place of trepidation and a place of feeling like they've got no control. And so what I always ask them to do is to start questioning, if that's where they're living, start questioning, what is the foundation that really made me feel this way? And can I do something better for my kids? I love what you said on the optimization, right? We just try to optimize to the best of our ability what we can do for our kids. You know, people say, well, public school is free and that works for me because we have the two. I get it, man. But if I'm trying to optimize for my kids and all of a sudden McDonald's was free 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, I still wouldn't do it because it's not optimal for their health. Right. And so that's what I'm always asking parents to do is go, okay, just pay attention. What is optimal? What is optimal for you guys? What do you think the optimal thing is? And is there a way to get closer to that ideal, you know, for you and your family, and prioritize your kids enough to really have that conversation and to think through, have a thought exercise. Don't just fall, you know, straight in line with what you've been told. There's the way we're told things work, and then there's usually the way it actually works. So get as close to that as possible.
I love it, man. Well, if people want to find out more about your mentorship program through Apogee Strong, obviously just visit apogeestrong.com on the website right now. If they want to look up if an Acton Academy is near there, they can just go to what, Acton Academy?
Yeah, go to actonacademy.org and you can do a search function there and check out, you know, I'm helping more and more people. We've got, you know, more and more entrepreneurs that we're partnering with. And I'll tell you a little bit offline because there's some things that we can't even publicly announce yet. But, you know, we have more and more entrepreneurs joining the fray on this. And so, yeah, check out actonacademy.org, obviously apogeestrong.com. And we're going to be launching Apogee U this fall as well. So
love it, man. Well, brother, I really appreciate your insight, your feedback, your thought process. And I'm looking forward to chatting again and bringing forth more of the questions that I have, right? Because if I'm thinking about these things, I know other parents are too.
Yes, sir.
And I know we might talk like a lot about fitness on this podcast, but I got 2 kids and I'm heavily invested in them being the best humans they could be, as I imagine most parents are. So I appreciate the insight, man. And I hope to have you on again soon and chat about it again.
Anytime and every time, brother. I appreciate you greatly, man. Absolutely.
All right, brother. Have a great day.
You too.